Hey everybody, how's it going? We're here to talk more about bicycle law. And today I want to talk about something very specific. Usually I kind of talk about a lot of bicycle laws, but today it's all about what's called the Idaho Stop. So what is the Idaho Stop? So you've heard of the California Stop possibly, especially if you live in California. It's where you don't really stop at a stop sign, you just kind of roll through it. That is actually illegal, that's against the law. However, in Idaho, they've actually made it legal for bicycles. This goes way back to 1982. 1982, House Bill 541 in Idaho, they decided to make stop signs for bicyclists treated as yield signs. This does not apply to cars or motorcycles or any other vehicle, just bicycles. Because a yield sign doesn't mean you can just go for it when it's unsafe either. So right away people are going to say, this is ridiculous, this is a ridiculous law, it's going to make things unsafe, people are going to blow through stop signs. Well, first of all, I would like to submit to you that if you drive in California, whether you're on a bicycle or a car, you'll note that neither one of them really stop at stop signs. That's why they call it the California Stop. In fact, in Idaho, they've done studies, especially in Boise, but all across the state. When this law went into effect, they actually had a reduction in bicycle injuries down by 14.5%. Now you might say, well, why is that? That's counterintuitive. When a bicyclist has to stop, they have to spend more time in the intersection, which is always a high risk zone for a bicycle. Car drivers will get less frustrated being behind them, and they'll be less likely to make erratic moves around the bicycle. Because as you know, in the city, most bicycles travel as fast or faster than cars in traffic. With this kind of law, what also happens is car drivers become more cautious, which they should anyway, but when they think a bicyclist may or may not roll through the stop sign, they actually have to be more cautious, and it's now legally required for them to be more cautious. Now, this doesn't mean that a bicyclist can blow through a stop sign when there's traffic in the intersection and when it's unsafe. They still have to treat it as a yield sign. The legislators also, from their perspective, they argue that what this really does is it puts the focus on right-of-way rather than just obeying a stop sign. Because remember, driving is all about communicating with each other, which is why signaling is so important. Please, car drivers, please use your signals. Now, originally in Idaho, this was back in 1982, they said, stop as yield, but actually they also intended it to apply to red lights, to traffic lights. However, in 2006, they amended the law that cyclists must stop on red lights and yield before proceeding straight through the intersection and before turning left at an intersection. Now, this was actually the intent of the law to begin with. However, they felt that there was a lot of ambiguity. People didn't really understand how it applied, so they put it into the actual law in 2006. So not only stop signs, but red lights. The other argument that people say is, they say, well, we don't want two different sets of laws because then different things apply to bicyclists, to children, to this and that. Well, guess what? We already have that. There's helmet laws that only apply to children. There's different laws that apply to bicycles than cars. So for them to say that just because we want to keep it all the same because people will understand it is just a total fallacy. And in fact, most people don't know the laws anyway, regardless if they're the same or different. So we really should make the laws as to what's appropriate and what's safe and what encourages the right behaviors. Okay, so let's talk about California. Of course, we know California Code 21200, which is the one that states that bicycles have all the same rights and responsibilities as other vehicles. Now, the thing I want to point out about this is people always forget the rights part of this. They always say, well, you have the same, responsibilities. Well, you have the same rights too. So what's going on with California? So they are actually looking at the Idaho Stop. There's a new provision that's going to be added to California Vehicle Code 21200, that one that says the bicycles have the same rights and responsibilities. And it reads, it's letter C, notwithstanding subdivision A, which is the main one, a person operating a bicycle approaching a stop sign after slowing to a reasonable speed, and yielding the right-of-way to any vehicle or pedestrian in the intersection, or approaching from another highway or street so closely as to constitute an immediate hazard during the time the person is moving across or within the intersection, may cautiously make a turn or proceed through the intersection without stopping. However, if required by safety, the person shall stop before entering the intersection and may proceed after yielding the right-of-way. Okay, that's a lot of words, but they're very important words, so let's break this down. Okay, so what this is basically saying, there's a couple key words here. Reasonable speed is key. Now, this is, again, going to be left up to the courts to decide what is a reasonable speed, but again, safety is the biggest concern. and yielding the right-of-way to any vehicle that's in the intersection. So that's the same as a normal stop sign or yield sign, where obviously if someone's in the intersection, you can't go in the intersection until they clear that. Now, car drivers and bicyclists and pedestrians even ignore this rule all the time, but that's the rule. The other thing is, it says, however, if required for safety, the person shall stop before entering the intersection and may proceed after yielding right-of-way. So again, what that's just basically saying is sometimes you have to treat the stop sign as a stop sign. It's again based on who's there, what the situation is. Now there was a section that was deleted, which I'm very grateful this was deleted, that was going to be section letter D. A person operating a bicycle pursuant to this section shall continuously signal an intention to turn. So obviously you cannot require a bicyclist to signal for any continuous amount of time. You need two hands on the handlebars. It's not like driving a car where you can click the signal on and leave it. Your signal is your arm, so you're sticking your arm out there. That's your signal. Once you take your arm back, the signal's turned off. One of the reasons why there's so much ambiguity in this law is because a lot of people don't know what a yield sign technically means. So let's go to the vehicle code that describes what a yield sign actually is. So the yield sign vehicle code is 21803. The driver of any vehicle approaching any intersection which is controlled by a yield right-of-way sign shall, upon arriving at the sign, yield the right-of-way to any vehicle which have entered the intersections, that's the same as the new code, or which are approaching on the intersecting highway close enough to constitute an immediate hazard. The same, again, same verbiage as the stop as yield for bicyclists, and shall continue to yield the right-of-way to those vehicles until he or she can proceed with reasonable safety. So again, a yield sign doesn't mean green light. It means proceed when safe. And that's exactly what we want bicyclists to do. We want them to proceed when safe. There's another part of this yield sign law that I just want to go over real quick. Letter B of the yield sign 21803. A driver having yielded as prescribed in subdivision A may proceed to enter the intersection, and the drivers of all other approaching vehicles shall yield the right-of-way to the vehicle entering or crossing the intersection. So what this is saying is once that person who is at the yield sign makes that cross into the intersection, then all of the other vehicles have to consider them in the intersection. It's kind of implied in the first part of the law, but they want to be really clear. Like once you do take that right-of-way and you're in the intersection, no one else should enter the intersection. Now again, this happens all the time. The two lawmakers here that we're talking about are Assemblyman Jay Obernolte, who is from Hesperia, and actually a Republican from Hesperia, and Phil Ting, a Democrat from San Francisco. So it's bipartisan, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to propose the Idaho Stop for California. Now, they are not including red lights in this yet, although I think that's a wise distinction, inclusion, because a lot of times when you're a bicyclist at a red light, you don't trip the light, and you basically have to break the law in order to continue on your way, which is unfortunate, but it does happen quite a bit. Sometimes you wait. I've waited 8 minutes for another car to come to trip the light, and then sometimes because you're in front of them, they never trip it anyway because they're not on the sensor. And you can't always hit the button because there's not always just one lane. Sometimes you're making a left turn. So it's just a bad situation. Bicyclists should be able to safely go through a red light. However, they're saying no. Now, one of their arguments for not extrapolating this to red lights is that what it'll do is it'll encourage bicyclists to take safer streets, which is another reason why they think that the injury rate goes down, which is actually kind of true, because there are many streets that are safer that I don't take because there's so many stop signs. And again, I want to follow the law, but there's just so many stop signs. I'd rather take one of those main thoroughfares and try to time the lights rather than risk going through the stop sign laden streets and being hard on my knees, creating injuries that way. Now, the lawmakers made this law intentionally vague. The reason why is because it's really the bicyclist who needs to assess whether or not it's safe. Now, you might say, well, that's ridiculous. They're just going to blow through it. Well, that's against the law. You can't just blow through a yield sign. So what will happen is the bicyclist has the best view. They can see more. They have more of a field of view rather than cars who have blind spots and have a heavier vehicle that's harder to stop and maneuver. So it really should be, the onus really should be on the bicyclist to determine what's safe. Now, one of the arguments against is people say, well, now everybody knows the rules now, so if you change it, it's just going to cause chaos. Well, this didn't happen in Idaho. It won't happen in California. And actually, this is just not really true. I mean, how many of you believe that all bicyclists and all car drivers stop at stop signs anyway? Most of us know that almost everybody that drives a car and almost everybody that rides a bicycle at some point has run a stop sign. And I see this all the time. I very rarely see a car driver stop at the limit line, wait till it's safe, and then go. They're going through the intersection when other people are in it. They're rolling over the limit line. They're just blowing through stop signs altogether. That's in cars, and that's against the law. So bicyclists do it too. Pedestrians do it. You're just not going to get rid of that behavior. So you should have laws that make sense, not laws that are overreaching so that somehow that's going to magically get rid of another behavior that's further down the spectrum. That just is not going to happen. People who break the law now are going to break the law after this law. This law is not going to change whether or not you're a lawbreaker. There was a research study done by Jason Meggs of UC Berkeley that delves into this a little bit more. And what Meggs found was when he compared Boise, Idaho to Sacramento and Bakersfield, which have similar weather, bike lane amounts, similar workforce, population, topography, it's basically very comparable. They found that Boise, which has the Idaho Stop, has 30 to 60% less injuries for bicyclists compared to Sacramento. Now, it doesn't mention anything about Bakersfield, which is interesting. I don't actually have the study, I just had a citation from it. So I'm not really sure what the case is, but 30 to 60% is huge. Now, this study does also include the knee injury component and injuries that are caused by stopping and starting on a bicycle. So, but 30 to 60% is quite a significant drop. So again, Idaho being safer because it has the Idaho Stop. So again, we're talking about motivation, we're talking about safety, we're talking about ease of use of the roads, we're talking about all these factors, personal health, all of these things that are for this law, that are on this law side. So we really hope that California makes the right call and passes this law. So again, it's a win-win. Thanks for watching. Let's bring the Idaho Stop to California.